Welcome back, everyone, to the Pitre podcast. So, I apologize for not having an episode last week, and that was because I was in Pittsburgh. So, I was in Pittsburgh for the entire week for work, and it was my first time being in Pittsburgh, actually. So, Pittsburgh is actually really cool. Honestly, I had kind of like low expectations for Pittsburgh as a whole, but it's actually a really dope city. Very different from Philadelphia. Philadelphia feels very East Coast, excuse me. I feel super East Coast as far as like the temperament of people, the vibe. Whereas in Pittsburgh feels more Midwest. Pittsburgh feels more like Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Philadelphia feels more like New York, Boston, Washington, D.C., that kind of stuff. So the people are naturally a little bit nicer over at Pittsburgh, which I appreciate. There's more greenery too. Outside of the city, I didn't really get an opportunity to venture into like the heart of Pittsburgh, the heart of the city. So many fucking bridges, like insane amount of bridges. I think it's like freaking like 30 bridges, some crazy shit like that. But it's like a bridge everywhere in Pittsburgh. But I didn't get to venture into like downtown, that kind of stuff, unfortunately, which I'm going to be back for work, relatively soon. So I'll do that next time. And it's only like a less than an hour flight over from Philadelphia anyway, and it only costs like flight wise like $100-200. So it's not that big of a deal. I can always visit at another time. So yeah, I'll definitely be back, and the people are a lot nicer, man. Like, for example, when I was over there, I was checking into the hotel and stuff, and the guy at the front desk, there was two people, and they were kind of like joking, talking around. I was talking with them and stuff, and I'm really not that social of a person. I think you guys will know that by now, but basically, like, the guy was putting on gloves. Like, after I was checked in, he's like, you're all checked in. Then the other guy put on a pair of gloves. He was like, like the doctor gloves, basically. He put in the doctor gloves, and it has the big snap when you put them on. He's like, all right, time for a colonoscopy. And we all just started dying, bro, because it was so left field. I was crying. The people at the front desk was crying. The guy at the front desk was like, yo, don't mind him. He's an idiot. Like, I'm so sorry. And I just like couldn't stop laughing because it was so unexpected. So like, that's just how the people are over there. Just a hell of a lot nicer. Which as you get older, you start to appreciate. As a born and raised New Yorker, you're kind of used to people being rude fucks 24/7. You're just accustomed to it, and you kind of do it yourself in a way and kind of like play into that kind of stereotype. But as you get older, man, you want as much peace as possible. You really crave convenience. That's the one thing I started to realize as I got older. I crave convenience. I don't want people to be rude to me wherever I go. I want to be as nice to people as possible too. I just want things to go as easy as possible. When they don't, I get annoyed. So I totally get why old people get so irritated when shit don't really go their way and shit goes south. But yeah, it's a lot more green over there too, man. Like, I was about like 20 minutes away from the city, and it was a hell of a lot of green. There was just trees fucking everywhere, which once you venture out of Philly, you have to go like at least an hour to really, really, really hit the suburbs. You can hit like some variation of the burbs once you go further past North Philly for like 20-30 minutes or so. But like, if you really want to experience green, you're gonna have to go like 40 minutes to an hour outside of Philadelphia. Whereas for Pittsburgh, you have green as far as the eye can see, hell of a lot of land, literally like 20 minutes out from the main city, which is super cool. So Pittsburgh, dope city. Can't wait to experience it more. But we're not here to talk about Pittsburgh. We're not here to talk about work. We're here to talk about the revolution that has happened in Nepal. And spoiler alert, whoop-de-doo, it's regarding classism, which I've talked about a lot on this podcast, and how if a revolution is going to happen across the world, it's going to be one that is because of classism. And if it happens in America, it's going to be because of classism, not because of anything else. So basically, I want to cover everything that is happening or has happened in Nepal, what has caused the revolution, who caused the revolution, what is the outcomes and after effects of the revolution, and some other, countries and or cities that are experiencing that revolution of themselves as well in a similar format. And also, is this the destiny for America, essentially? Is this going to happen to America as well? Is this something that we can look forward to, which I'm not looking forward to it whatsoever? And if that is our future, what can we do now to try to divert it and make sure that it doesn't occur? All right, so let's jump into it, right? So, in case you've been living under a fucking rock, so in Nepal, there was a revolution. So basically, and I have a shit ton of notes here, so I'm gonna be reading off the notes for a large part of this podcast. So if you don't like that, I'm so sorry. So basically, this is like a mostly youth-led decentralization of the government. So Gen Z is everywhere, anyone from like 15 years old to like 27 years old. I think that's considered Gen Z. I am not Gen Z. I am a millennium. I am millennial. I think you can tell by my negative attitude and outlook towards life. Us millennials tend to be a little more negative. I think Gen Z as a whole are more optimistic, more positive. Gen Z seems to be far more confident than millennials as well. Gen Z just like doesn't really give a shit about what people think about them, how they view them, that kind of stuff, which is cool. It's cool to see, but I do think Gen Z kind of lose themselves. And I was talking about this the other day. I think Gen Z kind of lose themselves as far as like reading the room, you know? They're so focused on themselves and making sure they're living their best life and making sure they're living like the best expression of themselves that they don't really understand how other people view them, right? Because it could be in a negative format. Like people recording TikToks in the middle of fucking, like in the middle of, you know, a park or in the middle of the street or that kind of stuff. Like Gen Z don't give a shit about any of that. They'll just do it. Whereas as a millennial, we look at that like, yeah, that's kind of weird. Like you're kind of like doing this in the open, like maybe you should do this just at home, or like I don't know, it's weird to us in a way. Now there's some millennials that do it too, don't get me wrong, and they don't find it weird and they just play into it. But I think most millennials would say like some of the things that Gen Z does is very like they're not reading the room, they're not really seeing how this can affect them long term or how this can affect society long term. So yeah, Gen Z very confident, but also very focused on themselves in a way. But I do think that if any good is going to come from the world, if anything that's going to change for the better, as far as like our country and countries in general, it's going to come from my generation and Gen Z. And I say that for every single country. You know, the people who are currently in power across the world are the boomer population. Unfortunately, I know that's especially the case in America, which I'm going to be going over a little bit later. But those people stuck in their ways. They are career politicians, and we're not going to see any meaningful change as long as they're in office. It's going to have to come from us and also Gen Z once they get to the age where they can be elected into positions of power from our government. But basically, not to talk about our government, more to talk about what happened in Nepal. So basically, the movement in Nepal exploded into mass protests in early September 2025. So it happened this month, right? After the government ordered a sweeping shutdown of many social media platforms like TikTok, X, Instagram, Facebook. Basically, their government shut down all of the social media platforms. So that was the immediate trigger. That was like basically starting the match and just putting on the fuse. The bombs are already there. The fuse is already there. That's what lit the fuse, essentially. So piled on top of that were long-running grievances. So those grievances being widespread corruption within Nepal, nepotism, youth unemployment, and poor services. So this led to the violent clash between police, the burning of government buildings, the temporary closure of Kathmandu's airport, and the resignation of their prime minister. An interim reform-oriented cabinet headed by Sushi Karki, which I am so sorry if I pronounced that wrong. I am positive I pronounced that wrong. So basically, their prime minister stepped down, their cabinet stepped down, the cabinet building completely set up in flames and destroyed, and basically the Gen Z like elected someone else through Discord, essentially. So that person was installed to restore order and prepare for elections, which is going to happen in, I think, January 2026. So here's like a step-by-step timeline regarding what happened, right? So the background, the structure pressure. So years of political instability, visible elite wealth, the Nepal kid. So I've seen this across all of South Asia for the most part. And like it's in Nepal, it's in the Philippines, like it's everywhere in South Asia. And a lot of people in South Asia, especially the youth, are getting really upset by this. And it's like the whole Nepal kid thing. Basically, there's a bunch of these Nepal kids, which if you don't know what a Nepal kid is basically like, not necessarily, it doesn't have to be a child, but basically it's the child or the kid of someone who is wealthy, like either wealthy from like through businesses or in most of these cases like through governance. So like their dad's the prime minister or their parents are like, you know, was a former like elected official within their government, etc. So basically, it's people who are coming in from those backgrounds. The kids are from people from those backgrounds, and they're basically just flaunting their wealth on social media, right? They're showing how they're buying expensive cars, traveling through expensive places, and they're kind of basically just rubbing it in these people's faces. And the Gen Z youth who are consuming that content within that country are just like, yo, we know for a fact you didn't work for this. Like your parents paid for all this. Like, this is all your daddy's money. This is not your money. You did not work for any of this. You're flaunting it over to us, like how successful you are, but you know you didn't earn any of this. Not only that, we know that your parents were corrupt, and that's the reason how they got this. So that they know, so basically the Gen Z is like, yo, we know your parents are corrupt. We know they're fucking us over. And you're basically just flaunting it in front of our faces. And that's what led, and this is all across Southeast Asia, to be honest with you. And that's what in part led to basically like the uprising and the reason for the rebellion, essentially. So yeah, high youth unemployment, Nepo kids, weak trust in institutions created a large latent anger among young Nepalis. Now, the immediate trigger, like I said beforehand, it was the banning, and it was happening on September 4th. It was the banning of dozens of social media platforms. Like I said beforehand, Facebook, WhatsApp, YouTube, Instagram. The government blocked all of that, right? Because they found that, people were not happy with what was occurring, right, within Nepal, the youth. And in order to stop that dissent from spreading, you have to stop people from networking. And how do you stop people from networking nowadays? Is through social media. So, yeah, they block. So basically, they said they blocked it for the failing to meet new registration and local contact rules. This is partly tied to tax enforcement measures. So that move hit youth communication, digital livelihoods, and political expressions, and went viral as a grievance. Now, there are some platforms that the youth can still communicate from, like Discord being one of them. That was the biggest one as far as like how they communicated, like these protests and that kind of stuff. So they didn't basically block everything, but they block all like the major outlets for social media. Then we have mass mobilization. So this happened on September 8th and 9th. So student and Gen Z groups, many organizing on Discord, Instagram, and groups like Hami Nepal, which I guess is like a social media for them over there. So they called large rallies in Kathmandu and other cities. Demonstrations quickly grew into nationwide anti-corruption, anti-censorship protests. So escalation and state response. So the police used force like rubber, bullets, tear gas, that kind of like standard anti-protest shit that's used across the world for police and protesters. So, and there was times where in some accounts they use live ammunition, which is fucking insane in some of these clashes. So curfews were imposed. Soldiers were later patrolled streets. Confrontations turned destructive in places, government party offices, parts of Singna Dubar, Central Admin Complex, and other buildings. Basically, like the governmental buildings were torched to the ground, which I know a lot of people saw, and that's going viral on social media. The Tribhuvan airport was temporarily closed. Reported death and injury totals varied across sources as events unfolded. So the political fallout. Under mounting pressure and under the violent nights of clashes and arson, the prime minister did eventually resign. Social media restrictions were reversed, and the army engaged in protest leaders about an interim arrangement. So basically, the protesters won in this regard. The prime minister completely stepped down. Police said, okay, let's work on an agreement. Let's work on an arrangement to stop these protests, to keep you guys happy. And we're going to work on getting someone in office in the meantime and like completely redoing their governance. So the interim government and next steps. An interim reform-oriented cabinet led by the former Chief Justice Suli Kakari was formed to restore order and prepare for elections. This is going to be in March 2026. That's the date that's being reported. And investigations and inquiries were announced. So basically, one other thing or a couple other things that were going viral during all of this protests and stuff leading up to this were the One Piece flag being flown, right? Which, if you're not familiar with One Piece, it is an anime. It's the longest running anime. It's almost like fucking 2,000 episodes for this anime. It's been on for like over 20 years. It definitely, they say it's towards the end of its run, but it still has like another like 5 to 10 years left until it's fully completed. And it's very popular. It's the most popular anime out there, right? I know of the anime. I have been watching and reading it since like 2011, I think, 2011, 2012. I've put it on hiatus in the back burner because, like, yo, it's too fucking long, like, the development wise is too long. So I would not recommend anyone starting One Piece. I gotta be entirely honest with you. It's too long, bro. It's so fucking long. You gotta have to dedicate like a year of your life to fucking watching that thing, especially if you're an adult and you don't have free time. Like, it's going to take a while to get through it. So I'd say if you want to read it, go ahead and read it. I think it'll be a lot easier to read it. I think you can get done reading it in, like, if you're really dedicated to it, a month to 2 months, maybe even 3 months. But watching it is going to take a while, man. And listen, I'll come back to it when it's finally completed. I'm just tired of fucking having to keep up with it every single week for years, for a decade, over a decade. So that's my recommendation, man. It's popular. I understand why it's popular, but it's too fucking long. Anyway, basically the premise of the anime, if you don't know anime, you don't know that anime, is liberation, essentially. So basically it's just like a pirate crew running around fucking liberating countries from dictatorship. That's basically the best way to explain it. So that's for the most part, that's all it really is, right? There's blatant corruption out there and within that world, and this group of people are just going around and fucking liberating these countries for different reasons or another, right? So the One Piece flag has become synonymous with that Gen Z kind of rebellion, which I think, as far as like a rebellion and classism and just like overall governmental oppression, I think there's no better flag to possibly wave than for that one for Gen Z. So whoever came up with that during the protest, 10 out of 10 play on them. The government even tried to ban the flag, which never works. Like, government should never try to ban a flag. Fucking the U.S. tried to do that with Puerto Rico, and that's why Puerto Ricans fly the Puerto Rican flag literally everywhere as an act of rebellion for them trying to ban the flag. So, Nepal tried to ban the flag. Gen Z in Nepal just went harder and flew that flag everywhere. And there's pictures of, like, the parliament building on fire and like the One Piece flag being flown and that kind of stuff. So just in case you see like a really weird flag and you don't know what country that flag is not a country. It is an anime, and that's the reason as to why. So what politicians did that helped cause/accelerate the outcome, right? So order abroad social media shutdown. So the strict registration rules, rather than phase enforcement or public consultation that move directly, cut off young people's main organizing working medium and look like censorship, and that caused the immediate spark. So this is what they did wrong, essentially. This is everything that they could have handled this better, but basically their decisions led to this uprising. So they failed to address the long-term grievances, corruption, nepotism, jobs, etc. So the shutdown became a focal grievance because it exposed a deeper credibility gap between elites and the young electorate, basically. And the visual displays of elite wealth and social media feeds amplified a sense of injustice. So the initial heavy-handed policy and poor crowd management enforcement. So using force against large youth groups and reports of live rounds and at least some clashes escalated the anger and transformed protests into broader anti-regime action. So independent human rights groups highlighted excessive use of force in a lot of these cases, mixed messaging and political defensive moves. So some reports say that the prime minister told the party ministers not to resign even as the event spiraled. Inconsistent top-level responses delayed denials or reversal of the ban, undermined the credibility, and made political exit more likely. So basically, in short, a political avoidable policy shock, social media ban, plus chronic governance failures, plus heavy security response equaled rapid escalation for protests, nationwide uprising, and government collapse. So they handled all of this poorly, right? I mean, listen, every government's corrupt. Every single government is corrupt. If you don't think your government is corrupt, you're an idiot. Doesn't matter what country you're in. Governments are corrupt to some degree. There's going to be corrupt individuals within governments, because when you look at governmental positions, typically there's the highest level of power you can obtain within that country, right? So usually positions of power attract the worst fucking people imaginable. People who crave power usually are not great people. Historically are not great people. When you look at the historic leaders throughout time, a lot of them are not great people, man. So those positions typically don't attract great people. They attract corrupt people. They attract either power-hungry people, money-hungry people, or both. And there's going to be corruption in every government, right? But there's a difference between having a little bit of corruption within your government and trying to stamp down that corruption, and that corruption just being blatant, which in the case of the Nepali government, it seems like it was just blatant and out there for people to see. Like, everyone knew that the government was corrupt. I think the government, like, they had like a two-party system. The two-party system combined into one party. So basically there was no opposition whatsoever. And once everything becomes under one party, you know for a fact shit are not getting changed because everyone's in agreements, and there's going to be no, at least for America, right? The left is always battling the right. Democrats are always battling the Republicans, and the Democrats and the Republicans, the people who are elected within those positions of power for those parties, they're trying to do the best for those parties, basically. So if I'm a Republican, if I'm on the Senate or on Congress or whatever, then I'm going to try to pass things that are going to be in favor of the people who voted for me, right? And the same thing is going to go for the left as well. So when you have everything under one party, they don't give a fuck, basically. There's no infighting. There's no bickering. Things are not going to change. And that's the same thing goes for, like, in a corporate standpoint for monopolies. Once a organization or corporation owns everything within one, like, product and or service, so they run that product and or service, there are no competitors whatsoever, usually that product or service doesn't get better because they don't feel the need to get better because they have most of the customers as it is. Like, what's the point of improving when we have everyone, So competition leads to improvement, and when you don't have any political parties competing, nothing is going to get improved. So the corruption was blatant. The nepotism online, Nepo kids online flaunting the wealth definitely led to the younger generation being more angry. Not only that, there was terrible youth employment. There was terrible youth unemployment, and basically, like, the youth didn't really see a way out into, having a better life for the most part. Like, there was no jobs for them, It was easier to find work abroad than it was to find work in their own country. Which, listen, people will deal with corruption as long as they're benefiting from it. Like, the common person, right? The common person within that country would basically be okay with corruption as long as they're benefiting from it. So if they have a good house, if they are getting paid good wages, things are relatively cheap, things are good for them, they don't mind a little corruption. They're not going to, go gung-ho about the government or government officials being corrupt because they're like, yo, it's working for me right now. I'm not going to sit here and complain. I'm not going to try to change things and, change the status quo. Like, I'm benefiting off of it, so I don't want to change anything. We can just leave it as is. Little corruption, it is what it is, So when people are benefiting from that corruption or just benefiting from society as a whole, you're able to have a little bit of corruption that can skate on by, and be pushed under the rug. But when it's blatant, not only that, like, there's no jobs for anyone and people are just not getting paid fair wages and, living expenses are extremely high, then people are like, yo, why the fuck are we dealing with this corruption? This corruption is blatant and we're not even benefiting from it. So it's going to lead them to have a revolution, which exactly happened in Nepal. So there has been, like, a lot of videos coming out where, like, the Gen Z has been cleaning up after the protests and that kind of stuff. So, like, even though they did fucking set government buildings on fire and destroyed government buildings, like, they started to clean up after the protests and not just leave the city destroyed. So they're starting to reconstruct and do that kind of stuff, which is cool to see. Also, there were videos that went out as far as, like, what they did to the corrupt government officials, and it's pretty brutal, man. It's pretty brutal. Again, I don't condone it because they did some crazy stuff. Like, I remember they made, like, some government official, like, walk into the river and drown, like, literally forced him to walk into the river and drown. And then they set, like, another government official and his wife on fire. And they did some crazy stuff to some of these corrupt government officials, man. And listen, I'm not condoning it. I'm not saying they necessarily deserved it. What I'm saying is, man, no one's going to feel bad for you. No one feels bad for them. Literally, there's no one on earth, especially no one in Nepal, feels bad for those people. You can't sit there, manipulate an entire country, and for your favor, for your benefit, and then expect the people of that country to give a shit about you. It's not how this works. That's not how human beings work, man. Like, if you're going to exploit a country for your benefit, exploit an entire demographic of people for your benefit, when those people rebel against you, which is eventually going to happen, you can't cry about it, man. Like, you made your bed, you got to lay in it. So do I necessarily feel bad for those people? No, not really, because they were corrupt, and basically, like, that's the game you play with corruption, man. You're either going to get away with it and somehow, pass away before facing the hand of justice, or you're going to face that hand of justice. It's going to come down hard. So don't necessarily feel bad for those people, even though they died a horrific death. I don't think, they should have went out like that. I don't condone people doing that whatsoever, because that is like pretty fucking cruel, to be honest with you. But again, like, people in Nepal, don't feel bad for them. I don't really feel bad for them, but it does suck to see someone go out that way. I do admit that, and I don't condone it whatsoever. But basically, some of the other countries that are currently going through shit like this too, Bangladesh being one of them for a lot of those same reasons. So they had like a large student revolution in July 2014. It forced longtime leader from power, aftermath through 2025. Included bans on party activities, interim government, student-rooted mass movements, regime change, interim government, etc. Indonesia also, so widespread student and youth protests in 2025 over perceived corruption, police conduct and policy moves, unrest, and produced ministerial reshuffles and heavy political fallouts. Sri Lanka, another youth-led revolt, peaked in 2022. East Timor, I don't even know where the fuck that one is. Student protest in 2025 forced lawmakers to scrap a controversial pension allowance. And yeah, those are like the main countries that are currently going through that, have gone through that over, the past couple of years, which again, it's all within that region, which is really, really strange. Either like the corruption was completely blatant in that region, or something underlying is going on there. But notice another thing, that it was all youth. The change is going to happen from the youth of the country, right? And it's not necessarily this youth, it's just youth of the past as well. Like, for instance, when you look at the Vietnam War, right? The people who protest the Vietnam War during the 70s in America were college kids, and the kids who were going to be drafted into the Vietnam War. And who were they? The boomers. When the boomers are in their early 20s and teenagers and that kind of stuff, they were the ones protesting the Vietnam War. They were like, yo, this war sucks. There's no reason why we're in this war. This war is bullshit. Why are we getting drafted? They are the ones that changed basically our stay during the Vietnam War. We stayed far longer than we should have, to be honest with you. I think we all know that. We should never been there to begin with, but we went there because of France, basically. Fuck the French in that regard. And when the French bailed out, we stayed there for no apparent reason. But we would have lasted there a lot longer if it wasn't for the college kids at the time, which are the boomers, rebelling against the government and basically like forcing the government's hand to finally pull out of Vietnam and stop the draft overall. So the change is always going to happen from the youth, man. The change seldom happens from the older generation, right? People who are in like their 50s, 60s, 70s, usually those people are a little more set in their ways and they don't want to rock the boat and they just want to basically live the rest of their life through peace. Is going to be the youth that's going to cause an uprising for shit, right? So that's why whenever there's like protests on campus or colleges and that kind of stuff, the government, police are super quick to try to shut that down as quickly as possible, because they know firsthand, listen, if you let these kids continue to protest, eventually they're gonna get the public sentiment, and eventually you're gonna have to stop whatever it is that you're doing that's leading these kids to protest, basically, right? But the main thing here, as we can see, was classism as well. So the main issue for the Gen Z in Nepal rebelling against their country was classism. Same thing in Bangladesh, it was classism. It was, basically like their government, the people within that government, like basically their kids can get jobs within the government super easily, or like jobs within corporations super easy. And there's like a whole like culture of nepotism basically, and that's what led to people revolting, right? And all these other countries, for the most part, is nepotism and classism. So that's the issue that we're seeing across the board for countries all around the world. It's either classism or immigration. In the case of Europe, I think is more immigration than anything. Southeast Asia is classism. I think in America is a mixture between the two, is immigration and classism. But mostly I think our focus should be on classism, right? Because look, this is a tale throughout time, right? Look at any civilization that has ever occurred, ever. The Roman Empire, any empire, right? If an empire is not taken over by another empire, so it's not taken over by another country, that empire would eventually collapse, right? It would commit suicide. And typically, this is how it's happening, right? So the people who are in power for that empire, one, they will start to hoard power and wealth. So they start to hoard power and wealth. They don't want to basically let go of that power and that wealth. So they're trying to hoard it as much as possible. And also they stop doing things that benefit the common folk, that benefit the common people. And there was like a researcher who did like a really great article about this. I forgot the guy's name. He talked about this in depth, and he looked at every single empire throughout history and the ones that died by suicide. And that's always the common denominator between every single one, was that one, there was a hoard of power from the bourgeoisie or the elites within that time for that country and or empire. So they're holding power. They don't want to let go of it. They don't want to change. They just want to fucking, hoard as much wealth and live as lavishly as humanly possible. And also they stopped doing things that benefited the common folk, right? So they stop, putting money into social programs that benefit the common folk, and stop basically trying to benefit the common folks' lives, right? Whether it be like, improving agriculture or improving like waste management, or wherever the case may be. So once you have a mixture of those two, after a while, the people get tired and they rebel. And I said this time and time again, the power is always within the people. The power will always be within the people. The people who are in those governmental positions of power, they have an illusion of power. And I said this before, they have an illusion of power. They think they have power. They have power because the people within that country allow them to have power. They're letting you have power over them. Once the people of that country and an empire decide that they don't want you to have power over them anymore, you don't have power over them anymore. There's nothing you can do. Like once everyone decides in that country and empire to revolt, ain't nothing you can do. Look at France, for example, during the French Revolution. France is one of the most powerful countries ever, right? And again, the bourgeoisie at that time, they were doing the exact same thing. The people weren't benefiting whatsoever. They were going through constant wars. Like they were fucking going back and forth through war for basically forever. They saw the revolution that the Americans had against the British, and a lot of those people, because France helped us a lot in that regard, because they're like mortal enemies with the Brits for like a fucking, like they've been infighting for literal centuries. So they helped us out during the American Revolution. A lot of those people went back and started talking about having a revolution of their own within France, and the bourgeoisie was holding power. They, were taking all the wealth. Taxation was at an all-time high, and they didn't give a fuck about the common folk, and the common folk rebelled. And guess what happened to the monarchy? They got their heads chopped off, literally, not figuratively. But that happens with every empire eventually, from what we see. There's no empire that can stand the test of time, that can move forward. And while they're having those sort of issues, right? And those issues are correctable. You can change course. You can start to not hoard power. You can get those people out of office and elect new individuals. You can, start inputting programs that benefit the common people, which in America would be like free healthcare, free education, that kind of stuff. Like you can start to put things in place that the people feel that they're benefiting from the current government, and would basically lead them to not do a revolution. But again, when you push people into a corner, when people feel like there's no way out and things are not getting better for the foreseeable future and they don't see the country getting better as a whole, they're going to revolt, man. They're going to rebel. And it's no one's fault but the people in power. And that's why I say power is always from the people, is never within those governmental positions, man. You think you have power until the people say you don't have power anymore, and then you're fleeing the country for your life, essentially. Because look, even in the case for America, right? If everyone in America were to revolt right now, America's the strongest army in the world. There's nothing the American government can do. There's 300 million people in America, and there's more guns in America than there are people. There's no military in the world that can stop that. You know? Like, you're fucked, basically. I think America will be a little tougher for this to happen because it is a bigger country. And not only that, but like the culture and demographics between the different regions of America differ greatly as well. So like maybe one side of the country might revolt, but not the other side or whatever. But with, you know, in the age of social media where basically, you know, you can contact anyone from your fingertips and you can see anything that's happening from the country, you know, within scrolling. And my camera just told me to go fuck myself. You can basically, that can lead people to seeing, okay, like, you know, fucking California is revolting. Let's do it in New York, or, you know, Orlando's revolting. Let's do it in fucking Idaho, or wherever the case may be. So, again, like, yeah, it's going to get to a point where the people are just going to have enough. And you have to realize that if you're in a governmental position, say, hey, things are getting progressively worse. People are starting to become more agitated. We have to change course. But those people don't want to do that, because once you have power, man, you never want to give it up. That's the tale as old as time. People who have power never want to give it up. They always want more power. They never want to give up less power. They never want to not be elected into power, re-elected into power. They don't want to give it up whatsoever. Once you start hoarding wealth and have corruption, it's not going to stop until that person is completely out of office. So, again, I think, listen, America can 100% go down this route. A lot of people think it couldn't happen in America. It can 100% happen in America. It happened to Rome, it happened to France, it happened to countless other empires throughout history. It can happen here too, right? And I think America is like the oldest running empire at this point. I think we passed the Roman Empire a couple years ago. But I don't want it to happen in America. Like, I don't want that. I don't want to have to go through a classism revolution, you know? I don't want that in my time, man. I just want to live an easy life. I don't want to have to be a revolutionary, bro. I think I would do a hell of a job as a revolutionary. Don't get me wrong. I think I'm charismatic enough to get the people going. But I don't want to do that, bro. I want to live a simple and easy Puerto Rican life, you know? I don't want to have to fucking take up arms for some bullshit, bro. I just want to live an easy life. I don't want to deal with any of that shit. I don't want to have the country to deal with any of that shit. Because here's the thing, right? If you were to topple the government, if a country is able to topple a government, so like in Nepal, for example, right? They topple their government. The government that can come after can be a lot worse than the government they just toppled. They can install communism. They can install socialism. I'm not saying those two things are bad things, but it can completely differ from the society that they've once lived in, the governance that they once lived in, excuse me. So things could be worse after you topple your government, essentially. And I don't fucking want to see the American government toppled for, you know, us to get some fucking dictator or some other bullshit in its place. So I do think, you know, as a whole, the American government is definitely the best in the world, but I think that we're pretty corrupt, man. I think we got to change, and I think we're going to see that change once. I gotta hate on the boomers. I think once the boomers get out of office, we'll start to see some significant change. I think the boomers, a lot of these people that are in, you know, positions of power for the Senate and Congress are boomers, and there are career politicians. They've been there for like 30 fucking 40 years, right? They're not changing. Those dudes are like 80 years old. They shouldn't even be in that position whatsoever because they're 80 years old. Like, my grandma is 80 years old, and I love her. I love her to death. She's my favorite person in the world. I would not feel comfortable her determining the future of this country. She doesn't know what the fuck is going on. She can't even see. She can barely hear. Like when you're 80 years old, man, you're not at your mental peak. And yes, I guess there are some outliers, right? There are going to be some outliers of 80-year-olds that are sharper than your average 20 or 30 or even 40-year-old. But that's not the general consensus. That's not the general consensus whatsoever. So I don't want that, right? I don't think people who are that age should be in these positions of power. I think we have to have a term limit, but that's a different conversation for another time. But listen, man, like, it's going to get to a point where that demographic is going to completely leave this earth, basically. That generation is getting old, and for the next 10-15 years, eventually all of them are going to go, and those positions of power will eventually finally be fucking open, and now people who are in their 40s and 50s, or millennials and Gen Z, can finally get into those positions to start making some meaningful change. I think change is only going to happen in this country through my generation, through Gen Z. I've had boomers say that too. I've had people who are older, Gen X, say the exact same thing, that change is going to happen from my generation and below. So I think that's our best bet in America, because things are not looking good in America right now, man. Like, it's bad, and maybe it's being exaggerated, through social media and the news and that kind of stuff. I'm like, dude, it's as bad as I've ever seen it right now. Like, I think our generation, my generation, Gen Z, needs to unite. I think we're too divided into dumb shit that really doesn't matter anymore. I think we need to unite and realize, like, there's a classism issue going on. This is something that we need to address as a whole and not be divided over stupid stuff. But again, man, like, I don't want anarchy to happen here. That would fucking suck. Like, I don't want to live through that shit. But I do think stuff has to change. And if it doesn't change, someone's going to think anarchy is the answer, and eventually is going to go down that route. That's what happens when things don't change for the better for a country. People get agitated and they force change. So I think, for the sake of America, my generation, millennials and Gen Z, will be the saviors of the country. And if we can't get it done, then I don't think anyone else will, to be honest. So that's a very, very bleak way to end this episode. I can talk about that stuff all day, man. I could ramble all day. And I apologize for my freaking camera turning off. Literally, my camera just told me I overheated. I'm going to go to sleep now. Bye-bye, basically. Go fuck yourself. So, yeah. That's what it is for this episode. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Again, this will be coming out. We're gonna resume the weekly formatted timeline of my episodes coming out Monday mornings at 9 a.m. I just missed last week because I was in Pittsburgh the entire week, and after being there for an entire week, having to do research on this topic and record and edit and all the other stuff, just wasn't going to be possible. So I apologize for that again, guys. But I hope you guys enjoy this episode, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. Bye.